Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku became a mutant in the X-Men universe. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The wind that whipped across the rooftop was cold, a biting harbinger of the evening to come. It carried the scent of concrete and the distant, metallic tang of the city, a scent Izuku Midoriya had always associated with heroes. But tonight, it just felt like loneliness. He stood on the precipice, not of the building, but of his entire life, his yellow backpack a laughable splash of childhood optimism against the grim gray of his reality. His question hung in the air between them, fragile as a spider's thread. Even if I don't have a quirk, can I be a hero? Before him, the impossible had happened. The symbol of peace, the monolithic all-might, had deflated. Not just in spirit, but literally. The steam had cleared to reveal a man who looked like a walking ghost, a scarecrow stitched together from skin and bone. His eyes, once twin sapphires of unshakable justice, were now sunken into dark, shadowed hollows. A ragged wound, a starburst of scar tissue, peeked from the side of his tattered white shirt, a permanent testament to a battle that had hollowed him out from the inside. This was Toshinori Yagi, an American pro-hero who had become a global icon before retiring to a quieter life in Japan, a land he had always admired. To the world, he was a legend in repose. To Izuku, he was the sun, and it had just collapsed into a black hole. Toshinori coughed, a wet, rattling sound that seemed to shake his entire skeletal frame. He wiped a trickle of blood from the corner of his thin lips with the back of his hand. "A hero without a power," he began, his voice a reedy whisper, a pale imitation of the booming baritone that had saved millions. "Kid, you have to be realistic." Each word was a hammer blow to Izuku's already shattered heart. He'd heard it his entire life. From doctors, from teachers, from his classmates, from Bakugo. Useless. Quirkless. Deku. But hearing it from his idol, from the one man he believed could make the impossible possible, was an entirely different kind of death. Izuku's gaze dropped to his red sneakers, worn and scuffed from 1,000 imagined training sessions. He saw it all flash before his eyes, a lifetime of meticulously detailed hero analysis notebooks, of whispered prayers for a power that never came, of shielding his face from explosions while being told to take a swan dive off a roof. But then, something shifted in Toshinori's sunken eyes. He saw the boy before him, not just the tears welling up, not just the trembling lip, but the raw, unadulterated spirit. He had seen that look before, in the eyes of soldiers, of first responders, of fellow heroes staring down certain doom. It was the insane, illogical, and utterly beautiful fire of selfless heroism. The boy had run toward the sludge villain. He hadn't hesitated. He had acted when every pro on the scene, including Toshinori himself, had been frozen. That being said, Toshinori's voice regained a fraction of its former strength. He looked at Izuku, truly looked at him, and saw not what he lacked, but what he possessed in abundance. "Your actions today, they were more heroic than anyone else's on that street. You moved before your body could think. That kid, that is the mark of a true hero." A spark ignited in the desolate wasteland of Izuku's chest. It was small, fragile, but it was there. Hope. Toshinori straightened up, a grim determination setting in his jaw. He had been withering away, his own power, a secret he guarded more closely than his life, flickering like a dying candle. He called it one for all, a sacred torch passed from master to student. But Toshinori knew, on a deeper, more intrinsic level, what it was. His own doctors, specialists at a private American facility years ago, had used a different word. A word whispered in fear and awe. Mutation. A unique genetic anomaly that allowed him to stockpile and utilize vast amounts of kinetic energy. And now, his body, broken and ravaged, could no longer sustain it. The mutation was burning itself out. He looked at Izuku. This boy, with a spirit of solid diamond but a body of glass. What if? The idea was insane. A gamble of cosmic proportions. But heroes, true heroes, were gamblers. They bet their lives against the odds every single day. "I have a proposal for you, young man," Toshinori said, his voice firm. "I can give you my power." Izuku stared, baffled. Give me your quirk? But that's impossible. Quirks are biological, mine is different. Toshinori interrupted, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. It wasn't entirely a lie. It was just an incomplete truth. It is a sacred torch, passed from one generation to the next, a power that can be given. And I have deemed you worthy of inheriting it. I will train you. I will mold you. And you, Izuku Midoriya, you can become a hero. Izuku fell to his knees, the tears he had been holding back now flowing freely, hot streams of disbelief and overwhelming joy. The number one hero in the world had just told him he could achieve his dream. In that moment, on that cold, lonely rooftop, Izuku Midoriya's life was irrevocably and completely changed. He didn't know it then, but so was the world. The salt-laced air of Dagoba Municipal Beach Park had become Izuku's entire world. For months he had toiled, his life a repeating cycle of school, sleep, and Herculean labor. He hauled refrigerators, dragged tires, and pulled a rusted-out truck across the sand under the watchful, and often critical, eye of Toshinori. His goal was to forge his body into a suitable vessel for the power he was to receive. His muscles ached, his hands were raw and calloused, but his spirit soared. A hero's body is a tool, young Midoriya! Toshinori would bark, though his voice was often punctuated by a hacking cough. You must be strong enough to wield the power, or it will tear you to pieces. The words were more prophetic than either of them could imagine. Finally, the day came. The beach was clean, the rising sun glinting off a pristine shoreline that had once been a mountain of trash. Izuku stood atop the last pile of refuse, screaming his triumph to the dawn sky, his body lean and corded with new muscle. Toshinori, in his muscle form, stood before him, a proud smile on his face. Well done, my boy! You've exceeded all my expectations. You have prepared the vessel. Now, it is time for the ceremony. He plucked a single strand of his golden hair. Eat this. Izuku's face was a comical mask of confusion. Huh! To inherit my power, you need to ingest some of my DNA. All Might explained with a booming laugh, enjoying the boy's bewilderment. That's how it works. Now, no time to waste. Eat. Eat. Hesitantly, reverently Izuku took the strand of hair. It felt electric. It hummed with a barely contained energy. He closed his eyes, thought of his dream, and swallowed. It went down with a gulp, a strange, warm feeling spreading through his chest. It was symbolic, of course. Toshinori knew that. The transfer wasn't truly in the DNA. It was about bioresonance, about acceptance. The hair was merely a physical anchor, a catalyst carrying the resonant frequency of his power. The true trigger was psychological, the boy's absolute belief, his acceptance of the gift, and his burning desire to use it. It was a key turning in a lock that had been hidden deep within Izuku's own genetic code his entire life. A lock he never knew existed. All right. All Might roared. Now feel it! Clench your buttocks and scream from the depths of your heart. Smash! Izuku took a deep breath. He closed his eyes and reached inside himself, searching for the new, brilliant power he had just ingested. He found something. It wasn't a gentle flame or a quiet pool. It was a sun, a raging, boundless, terrifying inferno of energy that had been sleeping within him, dormant and waiting. All Might's gift hadn't been a transfer, it had been an ignition. It had flicked the master switch on a nuclear reactor. He felt the power surge, not just from his core, but from everywhere. It was drawn from the kinetic energy of the waves crashing on the shore, the thermodynamic energy of the rising sun, the very spin of the planet beneath his feet. It was a torrent, a tidal wave of force that his mind, his body, his very soul was not prepared for. His hero analysis notebooks had always theorized about power output, percentages, and control. This was not a percentage. This was infinity. Too much, his mind screamed. It's too much. He tried to channel it into his right arm, just as All Might had instructed. He imagined the punch, the heroic impact. But it was like trying to funnel the entire Pacific Ocean through a garden hose. The energy refused to be contained. A blinding, emerald green light erupted from his body. It wasn't a glow. It was an explosion of pure being. The sand around his feet vitrified into jagged, green-tinged glass. The air itself seemed to scream, tearing with a sound like a billion lightning bolts striking at once. All Might, thrown back by the sheer force of the blast, could only stare in horror. This wasn't One for All as he knew it. This was something else. Something primal and terrifyingly powerful. Izuku felt a sensation beyond pain. It was deconstruction. The bones in his arm didn't just break, they sublimated. The energy, refusing the single channel, burst from his entire body. His legs shattered, his ribs cracked and splintered, and the backlash of the unrestrained force slammed through him, rupturing organs and tearing muscle from bone. A hemispherical dome of green energy expanded outwards from him, silent and devastating. It didn't explode in a conventional sense, it simply unmade. The remaining piles of scrap metal and trash were not thrown, but disintegrated into dust. A 50-meter section of the concrete sea wall turned to powder. The wave of force hit the ocean, and the water for 100 meters out flash-boiled into a mushroom cloud of steam. From the center of the devastation, a psychic scream of agony, confusion, and raw, untamed potential echoed across the globe, imperceptible to most, but a deafening shriek to a select few. Izuku collapsed, a broken marionette in the center of a crater of glass and dust. His vision swam, the world a blurry mess of red and green. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was All Might's horrified face, the hero's bravado completely gone, replaced by a terrible, soul-crushing guilt. The last thing he felt was the power, still humming within him, a caged star in a body of ruin. The smell of antiseptic and the rhythmic, electronic beep of a heart monitor were the first things to pierce the black veil of unconsciousness. Izuku's eyelids fluttered open, heavy as lead shutters. The world was a white, sterile blur. Pain was a constant, a roaring ocean beneath the placid surface of potent painkillers. Every inch of his body was a symphony of agony. He tried to move his arm. A bolt of white-hot fire shot up his shoulder, and he choked back a cry. He looked down. His right arm was encased in a complex, bulky cast, riddled with pins and external fixators. His left leg was the same. He could feel bandages wrapped tightly around his torso. Don't try to move, Izuku, his mother's voice. It was thick with tears, stretched thin with sleepless nights. He turned his head, a monumental effort, and saw her. Inko Midoriya was slumped in a chair by his bedside, her face pale and drawn, dark circles under her red-rimmed eyes. She looked as if she had aged a decade in a matter of days. "Mom!" His voice was a dry rasp. She was at his side in an instant, her small, warm hand gently taking his uninjured one. "Oh, Izuku, my baby!" she sobbed, tears splashing onto his hand. "The doctors, they don't know what to think. They said your bones weren't just broken, they were shattered. Like glass. They've never seen anything like it." The door to the private room creaked open. Toshinori Yagi entered, looking even more gaunt and haunted than before. He held a small bouquet of flowers that looked ridiculously cheerful in his skeletal hand. He placed them on the nightstand, avoiding Inko's accusing, terrified gaze. "Young Midoriya," he started, his voice barely a whisper. I am so sorry." Izuku looked at his mentor, his hero. There was no anger, only a deep, gnawing confusion. What happened? One for All, was it too strong?" Toshinori sank into a chair, his head in his hands. "I don't know," he admitted, the words tasting like failure. "I have never seen it react like that. The power I passed to you, it should have been a spark. What happened on that beach was an inferno. The Japanese Hero Public Safety Commission is investigating. They've cordoned off the entire area. The official story is a gas main explosion, but no one is buying it. The energy signature was unique." A doctor entered, a stern-faced man with a clipboard. He nodded curtly at Inko and Toshinori before turning his professional gaze on Izuku. "Midoriya-san. Good to see you're awake. We've run every test we can. Your quirk factor test came back negative, as it always has. However, the cellular damage and subsequent regeneration you're exhibiting is off the charts. The energy readings from the incident site don't match any known quirk on record." He paused, adjusting his glasses. "There is another classification. It's rare, especially in Japan where the quirk phenomenon is so prevalent and understood. It's a term used more frequently in the Americas. We believe your power manifestation was not that of a quirk. He took a breath, his expression becoming grim. We believe you are what is known as a mutant. The word hung in the sterile air, cold, an alien. Mutant. It wasn't a word of celebration, like quirk. It was a word of fear. A word for the unknown, the uncontrollable, the other. In a society like Japan's, built on order, regulation, and the careful integration of quirks into daily life, mutant was synonymous with monster. The news reports started a few days later, while Izuku was still confined to his hospital bed. At first, they were whispers. Anomalous energy event. Unregistered power. Then, the leaks began. Cell phone footage from a ship offshore showed the terrifying green dome of light. Experts were brought on television, talking about the dangers of unclassified genetic expressions. The term mutant started to be used, tentatively at first, then with increasing frequency and fear. When Izuku was finally released, a ghost of his former self in a wheelchair, the world had changed. The looks he got from neighbors were no longer pitying, but fearful. Whispers followed him and his mother down the street. Their apartment door was vandalized overnight, a single, ugly word spray-painted in red bakemono. Monster. Inko would scrub it off, tears streaming down her face, while Izuku sat inside, the sound of the brush strokes like sandpaper on his soul. He was a prisoner, in his own home. He tried to train, to access the power again in a controlled way, but even the smallest flicker of it sent blinding pain through his healing bones. He was a living bomb, and he didn't know how to defuse himself. All Might visited, a shadow of guilt and helplessness. He brought training regimens, breathing exercises, anything he could think of to help the boy he felt he had broken. But his knowledge was of one for all, a cultivated, controlled power. This raw, cosmic force inside Izuku was beyond his comprehension. I failed you, my boy, Toshinori said one evening, his voice heavy with regret as he watched Izuku struggle to simply lift a glass of water without his hand trembling. I have unleashed something I don't understand. I tried to give you a dream, and instead I've given you a curse. Izuku shook his head, a fire of defiance in his eyes, even as his body betrayed him. No. You gave me a chance. It's my fault. I wasn't strong enough. I need to learn. I need to get it under control. I can still be a hero. I have to be. But as the days bled into weeks, that belief began to fray. He was a danger. A pariah. His dream of entering UA High School was now an impossibility. They would never accept an unstable mutant with a self-destructive power he couldn't control. His dream wasn't just distant. It was on another planet, thousands of miles away, in a sprawling mansion in Westchester County, New York. A man sat in the center of a spherical chamber, a helmet of gleaming metal and wires covering his head. The air hummed with power. This was Cerebro. And this was Professor Charles Xavier. He was not searching, merely observing. He cast his telepathic senses across the globe, a shepherd watching his flock, feeling the ebbs and flows of mutant consciousness. He felt the familiar minds of his X-Men in the mansion above, the nascent sparks of young mutants just discovering their gifts, the simmering anger of Magneto in some distant land. Then it happened. Without warning, a psychic event of unimaginable magnitude tore through the quiet symphony of his mind. It was not a thought. It was a raw, primal scream. A supernova of psychic energy bloomed on his mental map, originating from Japan. It was a cataclysmic birth, a torrent of agony, confusion, and a terrifying, earth-shattering level of raw potential. It was so powerful, so violent, that it almost knocked him from his chair. The lights in the Cerebro chamber flickered and died, and the professor gasped, ripping the helmet from his head. Sweat beaded on his brow. He had felt the birth of powerful mutants before, Omega-level beings like Aurora or Jean. This was different. This was on a scale he had only ever theorized about. It was the psychic echo of a power that could rewrite physics. And intertwined with that raw power was a feeling so pure, so achingly familiar to him, the desperate, unbreakable will to do good. It was a paradox of cataclysmic force and heroic spirit, all contained within a single, screaming consciousness. Aurora Monroe Storm sensed the change in the atmospheric pressure around the mansion as Cerebro's power systems faltered. She swept into the chamber moments later, her white hair a stark contrast to the gloom. "Charles? What is it? What did you see?" Xavier looked up at her, his blue eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. "A new light, Aurora. The brightest I have ever seen." He wheeled his chair over to a console, his hands flying across the keyboard, pulling up satellite data, news reports, anything he could find about an anomalous event in Japan. He found it quickly: Dagoba Beach. A gas explosion. He knew better. "And?" Storm pressed, her voice a concerned rumble. "And it is in more danger than any mutant I have ever encountered," Xavier said grimly. "Not from others, but from himself. And within him, there is something else. An echo. A legacy. It's extraordinary." He had to act. A power like that, left untamed and steeped in fear and isolation, would either consume its host or shatter the world around him. Or both. The Midoriya apartment was suffocatingly quiet. It was late. Inko was trying to sleep on the couch, though her fitful tossing and turning told Izuku she was having no more success than he was. He sat on his bed, his room a shrine to a dream that now felt like a cruel joke. All Might posters stared down at him, their bright colors and confident smiles a mockery of his broken body and shattered hopes. He stared at his right arm, now in a simpler cast. The doctor said the bones were healing at an impossible rate, knitting themselves back together with unnatural speed, but he could still feel the power thrumming under his skin, a sleeping dragon that could awaken at any moment. He was afraid to sleep, terrified he might lose control and bring the entire apartment building down around them. A wave of despair washed over him, so potent it was almost a physical force. It was over. He was a monster. He had endangered his mother, ruined his own life, and become a thing to be feared. The tears he had fought for weeks finally came, silent and hot, tracing paths down his scarred cheeks. "It is not over, Izuku Midoriya." The voice was not spoken aloud. It was inside his head, yet it was not his own thought. It was calm, gentle, and radiated an empathy so profound it felt like a warm blanket settling over his frayed nerves. Izuku's head snapped up. "Who's there?" he whispered, his heart hammering. Inko stirred on the couch, her eyes fluttering open. She sat up, a confused look on her face. "Did you hear that? You are not a monster. You are not a curse." The voice spoke to them both now, a shared thought, a resonance in their minds. "You are simply new. And you are not alone." From the corner of the room, where the shadows were deepest, the air began to shimmer. Light coalesced, forming the image of a man in a wheelchair. He was bald, with kind, intelligent eyes and a serene expression. He wasn't physically there. It was a projection, a ghost made of pure thought. Inko gasped, pulling a blanket to her chest like a shield. Izuku stared, his fear battling with an intense curiosity. "My name is Charles Xavier," the man said, his mental voice calm and reassuring. "I am like you, Izuku. I am a mutant. And I am the headmaster of a school for gifted youngsters, a place where young people like yourself can learn to understand and control their abilities in safety. A home." He turned his gentle gaze to Inko. "Midoriya-san, I know you are afraid. Your world, with its neat classifications of quirks, does not have a place for your son. They see his power as a threat because they do not understand it. They will seek to cage him, to study him, or worse. The fear of the unknown is a powerful and destructive thing." He looked back at Izuku. "The power you possess is magnificent, Izuku. It is the power of a star, born into the body of a boy. Left on its own, it will consume you, but with guidance, with training, you can learn to master it. You can learn to be the master of your own destiny." Izuku's mind raced. A school. For people like him. A place to learn. A place to be safe. It was an impossible lifeline thrown to a drowning man. "Why?" Izuku asked, his voice trembling. "Why would you help me?" Xavier's projected image smiled, a sad, knowing expression. "Because a long time ago, I was also a young man, afraid of the power in my own mind. And someone helped me, and because when I felt your power awaken, I did not just feel the cataclysm. I felt your heart. I felt your desperate desire to help others. A spirit like that is too rare and too precious to be extinguished by fear and ignorance. He presented the choice, not as a demand, but as an offer. A sanctuary? An education? A chance? For Inko, it was an agonizing decision, to send her only child, her broken, terrified boy, halfway across the world to a man who spoke inside her head. It was madness, but then she looked at her son, at the suffocating despair in his eyes, at the way the world outside had already condemned him. The choice wasn't between keeping him and letting him go. It was between a cage and a chance at freedom. Her own tears began to fall, but these were tears of resolve. She walked over to Izuku's bed and took his hand. "You will go," she whispered, her voice choked with a mother's love and sacrifice. "You will go, and you will learn. You will become the man you were always meant to be." The day of his departure was a blur of gray skies and hushed goodbyes. The airport was a sterile, impersonal place, a gateway to an unknown future. His mother fussed over his single suitcase, packing extra sweaters and his favorite snacks, her actions a frantic attempt to extend her love across the thousands of miles he was about to travel. The final goodbye was the hardest. She hugged him tightly, her small frame shaking with silent sobs. "Be safe, Izuku. Be good. And call me. Every day. Promise me." "I promise, Mom," he said, his own voice thick with unshed tears. As he turned toward the gate, one last figure was waiting for him in the shadows of a support pillar. Tashinori Yagi. He looked older, wearier, but the guilt in his eyes had been replaced by a sliver of hope. "So, the professor found you," he said quietly. "He is a good man. A better teacher than I could ever hope to be for what you are." He placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder. "I failed to prepare you, my boy. I gave you a match, not knowing you were standing in a room full of gasoline. But your dream, your spirit, that is all you. Don't ever lose that. This world, the world Xavier is introducing you to, it's harder, colder than the one you know. They don't have symbols of peace. They have soldiers. But maybe..." He looked at Izuku, a flicker of the old All Might fire in his eyes. "Maybe it's a world that needs a symbol of hope even more." He pressed a small, worn All Might keychain into Izuku's hand. "Don't forget where you came from. But don't let it hold you back." Izuku nodded, unable to speak, clutching the keychain like a holy relic. He gave his mentor one last look, a silent promise passing between them. Then, he turned and walked through the gate. He didn't look back. He couldn't. Each step was a step away from his mother, from his home, from his past. He clutched the one-way ticket in his trembling hand, the flimsy piece of paper feeling as heavy as a tombstone. He was Izuku Midoriya. Quirkless. A freak. A monster. A mutant. He found his seat by the window and watched as the ground fell away, Japan shrinking into a patchwork of lights below. He was alone, broken, and flying toward a future he couldn't possibly imagine. But as the plane broke through the clouds into the brilliant, sunlit sky, he felt the power within him stir, not with malice, but with a quiet, waiting hum. It was a part of him, and for the first time, instead of just feeling fear, he felt a tiny, terrifying, incandescent spark of something else: determination. The journey across the Pacific had been a 14-hour exercise in suspended animation. Izuku Midoriya had been trapped in a metal tube, hurtling through time zones at a speed his brain couldn't comprehend, leaving every piece of his old life further and further behind. The world he knew, the familiar comforting clutter of his mother's apartment, the taste of katsudon, the specific shade of the sky over Muzurifu, had been compressed into a single, aching point of memory. He was adrift. The plane that met him at a private airfield in New York was nothing like the commercial jet he'd arrived on. It was sleek, black, and utterly silent, a predator resting on the tarmac. It had no visible engines, and the ramp that lowered to greet him did so with a futuristic hum. A woman with kind eyes and a pilot's uniform had simply checked his name on a tablet and gestured for him to board. He hadn't spoken a single word, his throat tight with a mixture of awe and terror. Now, that same silent jet was descending, and through the reinforced window, Izuku got his first look at his new life. It was green. so intensely green. Japan had its beautiful parks and mountains, but this was different. This was a sprawling, untamed verdancy, a sea of ancient trees that stretched to the horizon, and in the center of it all, nestled like a jewel in a velvet box, was the mansion. It wasn't just a mansion. It was a testament. A fortress of old-world stone and academic pride that sprawled across the landscape with the confidence of a mountain range. Gabled roofs, ivy-choked walls, and countless windows glinted in the afternoon sun. It was larger than any hero agency headquarters he had ever seen in his notebooks, larger even than some of the high schools in his district. A long, winding gravel driveway led up to a grand, columned entrance. As the Blackbird, he'd overheard the pilot call it that, settled onto a hidden landing pad behind a copse of trees, Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. This was it, the point of no return. His hands, clammy with sweat, tightened on the straps of his bright yellow backpack, the last vestige of the boy who had dreamed of UA High. It felt childish and out of place here. He felt childish and out of place. The ramp lowered again, and the air that hit him was cool and damp, smelling of rich earth, wet leaves, and the distant promise of rain. It was a stark contrast to the concrete and sea salt smell of home. He took a hesitant step down the ramp, his worn red sneakers crunching on the pristine gravel. He felt impossibly small, a stray note in a symphony he didn't know how to play. A figure was waiting for him at the edge of the landing pad. A woman of impossible grace. She was tall and regal, with skin the color of rich coffee and hair as white as a storm cloud, cut short and framing a face of stunning, ageless beauty. She wore simple but elegant clothes, a flowing blouse and dark pants, but she carried herself with the bearing of a queen. A faint, almost imperceptible scent of ozone and fresh rain clung to her. "Izuku Midoriya," the woman said. Her voice was a low, melodic alto, with a hint of an accent he couldn't quite place. It wasn't a question, but a statement of warm welcome. "I am Ororo Monroe. On behalf of Professor Xavier and all of us here, welcome to the Xavier Institute for Gifted Youngsters." Izuku's throat was dry. He managed a short, jerky bow, a reflexive gesture of Japanese politeness that felt awkward and clumsy in this new context. Thank you for having me, Monroe-san. It is an honor." He mentally kicked himself. "San? She's American. Or is she? That accent. Kenyan, maybe? Her hero name is Storm. Her powers are weather-based, so a connection to a region known for its distinct rainy and dry seasons makes sense from a thematic standpoint, but his mumbling was cut short by the woman's gentle laugh. It sounded like the rumble of distant, gentle thunder. "Please call me Ororo. Or Storm if you prefer. We are rather informal here." She extended a hand. Izuku stared at it for a second before realizing he was meant to shake it. His own hand, small and trembling, was enveloped by her warm, strong grip. It was a comforting anchor in the dizzying sea of newness. "I know this must be overwhelming," she said, her dark eyes filled with an empathy that transcended language. "Leaving your home, your mother, it is a great sacrifice. But you are safe here, Izuku. You are among family." Family? The words struck a painful chord. He had left his family behind. But looking at the calm, powerful woman before him, he felt the tight knot of terror in his stomach loosen just a fraction. Her presence was a palpable thing, a zone of tranquility. The sky above, which had been a clear, piercing blue, was now softly clouding over, the sunlight diffusing into a gentle, silvery glow that was easier on his jet-lagged eyes. He blinked, wondering if he had imagined it. "Allow me to show you inside," Ororo said, her hand gesturing toward the path that led to the mansion's rear entrance. "The professor is waiting to speak with you, but first, a brief tour is in order. It is best to get your bearings quickly. The house has a tendency to be lively." As they walked, Izuku couldn't help but crane his neck, trying to take it all in. The sheer scale of the grounds was mind-boggling. He could see a pristine lake in the distance, a large greenhouse, and what looked like a basketball court. It was a university campus, a private estate, and a fortress all rolled into one. They entered through a set of heavy oak doors into a wide, sunlit hallway. The interior was just as grand as the exterior. Polished hardwood floors gleamed under the light of elegant chandeliers. A sweeping central staircase rose to a second floor, its banisters smooth and dark with age. The walls were lined with portraits of stern-faced men and women who Izuku assumed were Xavier's ancestors. It was a place steeped in history and wealth, a world away from his humble apartment. "This is the main hall," Ororo explained. "The classrooms, library, and the professor's office are on this floor. The student dormitories are on the floors above." As they passed a large, arched doorway, sounds spilled out, the energetic shouts of students, the squeak of sneakers on a polished floor, and a loud, percussive BMF sound that made Izuku jump. He peered inside and saw a massive gymnasium. A group of teenagers were playing a chaotic game of dodgeball. A blue-furred, demonic-looking boy with a pointed tail vanished in a puff of purple smoke from one side of the room and reappeared on the other, cackling as he hurled a ball. "That's Kurt Wagner," Ororo said, following his gaze. "Nightcrawler. His spatial awareness is second to none." Izuku's brain went into overdrive. Teleportation. Not a warp gate like Kurogyri's, but instantaneous biological displacement. The smoke and smell of brimstone suggest a dimensional byproduct. Range? Mass limit? Cooldown period? Does he need to see where he's going? The tactical applications are limitless. Infiltration, extraction, flanking. He didn't realize he was muttering his analysis aloud until Ororo looked down at him with an amused, curious smile. He clamped his mouth shut, his face burning a shade of red that clashed horribly with his green hair. Sorry! It's a bad habit." "Not at all," Ororo reassured him. "An analytical mind is a powerful gift. Do not be ashamed of it." They continued down the hall, the sounds of the gym fading behind them. The atmosphere here was quieter, more academic. Students of various ages walked by, some carrying books, others chatting in small groups. They all had features. A girl with iridescent, insect-like wings gave them a small wave. A boy with rough, gray skin nodded a greeting to Ororo. No one hid their mutations, they were worn as naturally as his own green hair. It was shocking and strangely liberating. "Everyone seems normal," Izuku whispered, astonished. "We are," Ororo replied simply. "Our gifts do not define the entirety of our being, though the rest of the world often forgets that. Here you are not your power. You are you." Suddenly, a voice, sharp and authoritative, cut through the relative quiet. "Storm." They turned. Standing in the doorway of what looked like a high-tech briefing room was a man who radiated command. He was tall and leanly muscled, wearing a dark blue and yellow uniform that seemed more military than heroic. A sleek, ruby quartz visor covered his eyes, hiding his expression but somehow making his presence more intense. His brown hair was cut short and neat. His posture was ramrod straight, his jaw set in a permanent line of grim responsibility. Izuku recognized him instantly from news reports on mutant activities. Scott Summers. Cyclops. The field leader of the X-Men. "Scott!" Ororo greeted him, her tone cordial but with a new edge of formality. "This is Izuku Midoriya." Scott's head turned, and Izuku felt as though he were being scanned by a weapons system. The visor was unnerving, a blank, red line of judgment. "The kid from Japan," Scott said. His voice was flat, all business. "The Omega-level manifestation. Uncontrolled kinetic energy release. Catastrophic property damage. Self-inflicted biotrauma." He recited the facts like a damage report, each word a clinical, detached assessment that made Izuku feel less like a person and more like an unstable ordinance. "He is also a boy, Scott," Ororo said, her voice dropping a few degrees in temperature. "A child far from home, who has been invited here for sanctuary. Sanctuary is a luxury we earn by maintaining security," Scott countered, his gaze unwavering. "A power signature like his, untamed, is not a student. It's a liability. One emotional outburst, one nightmare, and he could bring the whole mansion down on top of the actual children we're trying to protect." Izuku flinched as if he'd been struck. Scott's words were brutal, but they were also true. They were the same fears that had haunted him for weeks, now given voice by a man who looked like he'd never known a moment of doubt in his life. He wanted to defend himself, to say he would never, to promise he'd be careful, but the words wouldn't come. He just stared at his red sneakers, his face hot with shame. That is enough. The new voice was soft, but it cut through the tension like a knife. A young woman with stunning, long red hair and kind green eyes stepped out from behind Scott. She wore a similar uniform, but she carried herself with a gentleness that was the complete antithesis of Scott's rigid authority. She placed a calming hand on Scott's arm, and he visibly relaxed, his shoulders losing a fraction of their tension. She smiled warmly at Izuku, and it was like the sun breaking through the clouds. Don't mind Scott. He has a hard time turning off field leader mode. He means well, even if his bedside manner needs work. Izuku felt a wave of pure, undiluted empathy wash over him, soothing the raw sting of Scott's words. It wasn't just her expression, it was a palpable feeling, a psychic balm. It's a pleasure to meet you, Izuku, she said, her voice kind. I'm Jean Grey. Jean Grey. The telepath and telekinetic Marvel girl, his brain supplied automatically. Considered one of the most powerful psychics on the planet. Her warmth, is it just her personality, or am I feeling a low-level telepathic projection? As if hearing his thought, Jean's smile widened slightly. I'm just glad you're here safely. We were all very worried. She didn't read his mind, he realized. She felt it. She felt the hurricane of anxiety, fear, and desperate good intentions swirling within him, and she wasn't frightened by it. She accepted it. Before Izuku could stammer out a reply, a blur of motion and a cascade of colorful sparks erupted from a nearby hallway. A teenage girl with short pink hair, wearing a bright yellow trench coat over a garish pink top, came sliding around the corner, propelled by a small burst of what looked like fireworks from her hands. She came to a screeching halt just in front of them. Whoa! New kid! She chirped, her eyes wide and curious. Is this him? The ground shaker from Japan? Name's Jubilation Lee. Jubilee, my talent. She wiggled her fingers, creating a shower of harmless, crackling plasmids. Is blowing stuff up. Mostly small stuff. For now. Suddenly, the wall next to Jubilee shimmered, and another girl, younger, with long brown hair, simply walked through it. She solidified with a soft thump, looking slightly embarrassed. Kitty! Ororo said, her tone one of mild exasperation. The doors, please. Sorry, Ororo. The girl, Kitty, mumbled, blushing. I was in a hurry and well. Hi, she said to Izuku, giving him a shy wave. I'm Kitty Pride. Don't mind me. She then hurried down the hall, presumably to a destination that didn't require walking through solid matter. Izuku's head was spinning. A teleporter, a human firework display, a girl who could walk through walls, a stern soldier with laser eyes, a kind-hearted telepath, and a weather goddess. And this was just the welcome wagon. Ororo had been right. The house was lively. It was chaotic. It was a school, not a military base, as Scott's demeanor suggested, but a place filled with teenagers, with all their awkwardness and energy. For the first time since the cataclysm on the beach, a genuine, tiny sliver of hope took root in Izuku's heart. Maybe he could fit in here. Scott cleared his throat, bringing the moment to an end. The professor is waiting. This way. He turned and led the way down the hall, his boots making precise, rhythmic sounds on the floor. Jean gave Izuku one last encouraging smile before following Scott. Ororo placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Deep breaths, Izuku. The hardest part is over. Izuku wasn't so sure about that. He had a feeling the hardest part was just about to begin. Professor Xavier's office was a sanctuary of quiet wisdom. It was a large, circular room, lined from floor to ceiling with books on every conceivable subject: genetics, philosophy, history, poetry. A large mahogany desk sat before a bay window that overlooked the serene lake. A fire crackled warmly in a stone hearth, chasing away the chill of the New York air. The room smelled of old paper, lemon polish, and burning oak. And in the center of it all, seated behind the desk in his motorized wheelchair, was the man who had called to him across the world. Charles Xavier looked older in person, his face lined with the weight of 1,000 burdens, but his blue eyes were just as kind and piercing as they had been in his telepathic projection. Izuku Midoriya, he said, his voice the same calm, resonant tone Izuku remembered. "Thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." He gestured to a comfortable leather armchair opposite his desk. Izuku sat down stiffly, his backpack resting by his feet. Ororo stood quietly by the door, a silent, supportive presence. "I imagine you have a great many questions," Xavier began, his hands steepled before him. Izuku's mind was a maelstrom of them. What is this power? Why me? Can I control it? Can I go home? Can I still be a hero? But only one came out, a choked whisper. What am I? Xavier's expression was gentle, a doctor about to deliver a life-altering diagnosis. You, Izuku, are a mutant. Your body possesses what is known as the X gene. It is the source of your extraordinary abilities. Your manifestation was uniquely violent, but the root cause is the same as everyone else in this house. But my core tests were always negative, Izuku insisted. In Japan, they have it down to a science. The extra joint in the pinky toe, the genetic markers, an incomplete science, Xavier corrected softly. Japanese society, in its laudable desire for order, has categorized and defined the quirk phenomenon based on the dominant expressions of power in their population. They have a map of a single country, and believe it to be a map of the entire world. The X gene is more complex, more varied, and sometimes, it can lie dormant, completely undetectable, until triggered by a moment of extreme stress, or by an external catalyst. He paused, letting the information sink in. Which brings us to your friend, Tashinori Yagi. Izuku's head snapped up. All Might? What does he have to do with this? Everything, Xavier said, his gaze intense. Tashinori is also a latent mutant. His ability, the one he calls One for All, is a variation of my own classification for your power. He has the ability to stockpile and metabolize energy to achieve superhuman feats. However, his body was ravaged by injury, and his ability to generate and contain that energy was fading. He could no longer recharge the battery, so to speak. He leaned forward. What he did on that day, with the ritual of passing on his power, he did not give you his mutation. That is impossible. Instead, he acted as a set of cosmic jumper cables. He created a bioenergetic link between himself and you, and in doing so, he poured the last dregs of his own power into you. It was meant to be a spark to light a candle. But he did not know that you were not a candle, Izuku. You were a dormant star. His spark ignited your core. The room was silent save for the crackling of the fire. Izuku's mind reeled, trying to process the sheer scale of what Xavier was saying. All Might, a mutant, his power hadn't been passed on. It had been a key, unlocking a door inside him. My mutation, Izuku stammered, his analytical mind kicking in despite his shock. What is it? Specifically, we've been studying the energy readings from the event, Xavier said, gesturing to a screen on his desk that lit up with complex graphs and energy signatures. Your ability is twofold. First, you possess kinetic energy absorption. You passively, naturally, absorb and stockpile ambient energy from the world around you. Motion, heat, sound, you are a living battery, constantly charging. This is why your healing factor is so potent. You have a near-limitless well of energy to draw from for cellular regeneration. The second part, he continued, his expression turning grave, is kinetic energy transference and amplification. This is the legacy component. When Tashinori jump-started your system, his power, and the psychic echoes of its previous wielders, grafted itself onto your own mutation. It didn't give you its power, it gave you its template. It taught your body how to receive a massive, instantaneous charge of external energy and, more importantly, how to stockpile it almost infinitely. Izuku felt a chill run down his spine. The vestiges. The people I see in my dreams, Xavier nodded slowly. Psychic echoes. Ghosts in the machine. Remnants of the consciousness of past users, imprinted upon the energy itself. A fascinating and unprecedented phenomenon. We are calling your ability a legacy mutation. You do not just wield your own power, Izuku. You are the custodian of a lineage of power. He let out a long, slow breath. And that, my boy, is what makes you so incredibly powerful, and so incredibly dangerous. The energy you unleashed on that beach was less than 1% of your potential stockpile. When I located you on Cerebro, the psychic shockwave was formidable. We have a classification for mutants of your potential. Omega level. A mutant with the power to affect the entire world. Xavier looked him directly in the eyes, all warmth momentarily gone, replaced by the chilling gravity of truth. At your full potential, Izuku, properly controlled, you could punch a continent hard enough to crack it. But as you are now, trying to use even a fraction of that power will not break your bones. It will atomize them. It will tear you apart, molecule by molecule, and likely take a city block with you. You are holding the power of a god in a body of a mortal. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. A god. A monster. The line was thinner than he ever could have imagined. All his life he had dreamed of power, begged for it, cried for it. Now he had it, a universe of it, and it was the most terrifying thing in existence. The dream had become a nightmare of cosmic proportions. He looked down at his hands, no longer seeing the calloused, determined hands of a hero in training, but a pair of unstable bombs. The weight of it all, the loss, the fear, the pain, the impossible burden of this power, crashed down on him. His shoulders slumped. His vision blurred with tears. So that's it then, he whispered, his voice cracking. I can't ever use it. I can't be. He couldn't even say the word. Hero. It felt like a lie. Professor Xavier wheeled himself around the desk until he was beside Izuku's chair. He didn't say anything for a long moment, simply allowing the boy to feel the weight of his new reality. Then, he spoke, his voice soft again. I once knew a man who could control magnetism. He could pull the iron from your blood. He could reverse the poles of the planet. He saw his power as a tool to rule, to dominate, to protect his people by force. I see my own power, the ability to touch any mind on this planet, as a tool to teach, to guide, to foster understanding. Power itself is not good or evil, Izuku. It is simply power. It is the heart of the wielder that gives it purpose. Izuku looked up, his tear-filled eyes meeting the professor's. The hope he'd felt earlier was gone, replaced by a vast, empty despair. But he had to ask. It was the only reason he had crossed an ocean. It was the only thing left of the boy he used to be. Can you teach me? He asked, his voice raw with desperation. He wiped his eyes with the back of his sleeve, a fierce, desperate resolve cutting through the despair. Can you teach me how to control it? Can you teach me to be a hero? Professor Xavier looked at the broken, terrified, and yet utterly determined boy before him. He saw the ashes of a childhood dream and the embers of a new, much harder destiny. He offered a small, sad smile. First, Izuku, he said, his voice imbued with a gentle, unshakable finality. We will teach you to survive. What you choose to do with that survival, that is up to you. The words were not the answer Izuku wanted, but they were the one he needed. They were not a promise of glory, but a promise of a future. A chance to not be consumed. A chance to learn. Later that evening, Ororo showed him to his room. It was simple, sparse, a world away from the all-might plastered shrine he had left behind. A single bed, a desk, a closet, and a window that looked out over the sprawling, darkening grounds. It was a blank slate. An empty page. He stood at the window for a long time, watching as other students walked across the lawn, their laughter carrying faintly on the evening breeze. He saw Jubilee create a small, beautiful bird out of light that flew into the air before dissipating into harmless sparks. He saw Kurt bamf onto the roof of the boathouse, just to watch the sunset over the lake. He saw Scott and Jean walking together, her hand resting in the crook of his arm, their silhouettes outlined against the fading light. He was an outsider. A foreigner. A weapon of mass destruction in a school full of gifted children. He was more alone than he had ever been in his life. But he was not condemned. He was not a pariah. He was a student. He turned from the window, his expression hardening with a resolve he hadn't felt in months. He knelt and unzipped his yellow backpack. He pushed aside the spare clothes and the snacks his mother had packed, his fingers searching for the one thing he had made sure to bring. He pulled out a brand new notebook. It was crisp and clean, its pages empty. The last one, filled with frantic, terrified scribbles about his own self-destructive power, was back in Japan. This one was for a new start. He clicked open a pen. On the first page, in neat, careful script, he wrote a title: Xavier's Institute for Gifted Youngsters, Power Analysis and Control. Volume 1. Underneath, he wrote the first entry: Subject 01, Izuku Midoriya. Mutation, Legacy, Kinetic Energy Absorption Stockpiling. Classification, Omega Level. Objective, Survive. The first week at the Xavier Institute was a disorienting blend of the mundane and the miraculous. Izuku attended classes in subjects like algebra and world history, sitting next to a boy who had to wear special gloves to keep from turning everything he touched to inert stone, and across from a girl who could speak fluent, grammatically correct conversations with squirrels. He ate lunch in a bustling cafeteria where a senior student would casually levitate the salt shaker down the table when asked. The sheer, casual reality of it all was a constant source of wonder and a sharp, painful reminder of how far he was from his old life. He was a ghost haunting the edges of this vibrant new world. He kept to himself, his head perpetually buried in his new notebook, which was rapidly filling with frantic, detailed observations. He sketched Kurt's teleportation signature, hypothesizing about the Brimstone dimension. He charted Kitty's quantum state, trying to understand the physics of her intangibility. He analyzed Jubilee's plasmids, noting their variable intensity and thermal output. It was his defense mechanism, his way of trying to impose order on a world of beautiful, terrifying chaos. The other students were a mix of curious and cautious around him. News of the Omega from Japan had spread through the mansion's rumor mill like wildfire. Some, like Jubilee, would try to engage him with cheerful, rapid-fire questions, while others would give him a wide berth in the hallways, their expressions a mixture of awe and fear. He was the new, unknown variable, the walking WMD who ate his breakfast quietly in the corner. His power remained a dormant volcano within him. Professor Xavier had forbidden him from even attempting to access it, instead focusing his private sessions on meditation and mental fortitude. They worked on building psychic shields, on creating a mental lockbox, to contain the raw energy, but it felt like trying to dam a tsunami with a handful of sand. The power was always there, a low, constant hum at the base of his skull, a promise of annihilation under his skin. But the one person whose opinion weighed on him most heavily was Scott Summers. Cyclops. The field leader of the X-Men watched him with an unblinking, analytical gaze. During training sessions for the other students, which Izuku was allowed to observe from a safe distance, Scott was a machine of tactical perfection. His commands were precise, his movements economical, his control over the devastating optic blasts that fired from his eyes absolute. He was everything Izuku wasn't: controlled, disciplined, and confident. To Scott, Izuku was not a student. He was a problem to be solved, a risk to be managed. And Izuku felt that judgment in every terse nod, in every silent, scrutinizing stare from behind that ruby quartz visor. The inevitable confrontation came on a crisp autumn morning. Izuku was in the observation booth overlooking a vast, empty chamber with metallic gray walls grid with glowing lines. This was the Shuriartech-enhanced training facility known only as the Danger Room. Scott's voice echoed from the control console. "All right, Midoriya. The professor thinks you're ready for a baseline diagnostic. Time to see what we're actually dealing with." Izuku's heart leaped into his throat. Diagnostic? But the professor said I wasn't supposed to. The professor wants to see if your meditation is having any effect. Scott cut in, his tone leaving no room for argument. He turned from the console, his arms crossed over his chest. His posture radiated impatience. "We can't keep you wrapped in cotton wool forever. Sooner or later, you're going to have to face the beast in your basement. Better to do it in a controlled environment where the only thing you can break is my equipment. And trust me," he added, a dry edge to his voice, "it's very expensive equipment, so try not to." Izuku swallowed hard and nodded, his palms already slick with sweat. He walked down the gantry and onto the cold floor of the Danger Room. The massive doors hissed shut behind him, sealing him in. The silence was absolute, amplifying the frantic thumping of his own heart. "The objective is simple," Scott's voice boomed from an unseen speaker. "A basic search and rescue scenario. We've programmed in holographic civilians, men, women, children. They are trapped under collapsing debris. Your task is to neutralize the falling debris before it can crush them. Speed and precision are key. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Izuku squeaked, his voice sounding small and thin in the cavernous room. Begin. The grid walls around him dissolved, replaced by a hyper-realistic projection of a crumbling city street. It looked like the aftermath of a villain attack back home. Buildings were sheared in half, fires burned in shattered windows, and the air was thick with holographic dust. In the center of the street, a group of terrified, crying people were huddled together, their forms flickering slightly. Above them, a huge chunk of a concrete facade was groaning, threatening to fall. Izuku's heroic instincts, buried under weeks of fear and restraint, roared to life. Save them. That's the mission. That's the job. He remembered All Might's words from a lifetime ago. Clench your buttocks and scream from the depths of your heart. He thought of the raw power he had felt on the beach. He knew he couldn't use all of it. He just needed a little. A fraction. A single, focused punch, just like his idol. Okay, focus. He whispered to himself, his whole body trembling. He fell into a familiar stance, his right arm pulled back. He reached for the well of power inside him, the caged star. He tried to be careful, to draw just a sliver of its strength. He visualized the percentage, a number he had obsessed over in his notebooks. 5%. Just give me 5%. A small smash, enough to shatter the concrete without hurting anyone. He closed his eyes and pulled. It was his first mistake. The power didn't respond in percentages. It didn't understand fractions. It only understood intent. And his intent, his desperate, all-consuming desire, was to smash. To save. To be a hero. He asked for a cup of water, and the ocean answered. A blinding, emerald light engulfed his arm. It wasn't a glow. It was a furious, uncontrolled fission. The green energy didn't just crackle. It screamed, tearing up his arm, shredding the sleeve of his tracksuit, and tracing fiery green lines across his skin like lightning bolts. The psychic vestiges roared in his mind, a chorus of alarm and agony. Too much. A voice that sounded like Nana Shimura's screamed in his head. Stop, but he couldn't stop. The circuit was complete. His knuckles were aimed at the falling holographic debris, but the power had no target. It was simply, release. Smash! He screamed, the word torn from his throat. He threw the punch. The resulting explosion of force was not a focused shockwave. It was a detonation. A raw, undirected blast of kinetic energy erupted from his fist, his arm, his entire body. It was a physical roar that shook the very foundations of the mansion. The holographic debris didn't just shatter, it was atomized out of existence, along with the holographic civilians, the projected street, and a 10-meter-wide section of the actual, physical, reinforced sheer alloy wall on the far side of the room. A gaping, smoking hole now looked out onto the pristine green lawn of the estate. The backlash was instantaneous and apocalyptic. The sensation was not of bones breaking, but of his arm ceasing to exist. The energy, with nowhere else to go, surged back through his body. His right arm was mangled, a grotesque ruin of shattered bone and torn muscle, bent at an angle that defied anatomy. The force threw him backward like a ragdoll, and he felt his legs snap under the impact as he hit the floor. Two of his ribs cracked with an audible pop, sending a lance of pure agony through his chest that stole his breath. He lay on the floor, gasping like a fish, his vision swimming in a sea of red and black. The world was a cacophony of pain, and the high-pitched ringing of his own damaged eardrums. The simulation had ended. Catastrophic failure wasn't a strong enough term. This was a self-inflicted disaster. The danger room doors hissed open. Scott Summers strode in, his boots crunching on fragments of the destroyed wall. He looked at the smoking hole, then at the broken, weeping boy on the floor. His face, from what Izuku could see below the visor, was a mask of cold, controlled fury. What in the hell was that? Scott's voice was dangerously low, devoid of its earlier booming quality. It was the quiet deadliness of a grenade with the pin pulled. I tried for 5%. Izuku choked out, tears of pain and failure streaming down his face. I wanted to save them. Save them? Scott knelt beside him, his shadow falling over Izuku. He wasn't looking at Izuku's injuries. He was looking at the destruction, the raw, untamed power. You vaporized them. You vaporized the objective. You punched a hole through a wall that's designed to withstand a full-power blast from me. You think that's what a hero does? He grabbed the front of Izuku's tattered shirt, hauling him up slightly. The movement sent a fresh wave of agony through Izuku's body, and he cried out, "Power is not a toy!" Scott snarled, his voice finally rising. Raw strength is nothing. It's a mindless, destructive force. A hero is control. A hero is discipline. A hero is making the choice to not level a city block to stop a purse snatcher. You have none of that. You're not a potential hero, kid. You're a potential natural disaster. You're a danger to yourself and to every single person in this school. Each word was a nail hammered into Izuku's soul. He was right. Everything Scott was saying was true. He was a monster. He was a failure. The overwhelming despair was so potent it almost drowned out the physical pain. Scott! That is enough! A new voice, calm but carrying the authority of a rumbling thundercloud, filled the room. Ororo stood in the doorway, her white hair seeming to bristle with static electricity. Her dark eyes, usually so serene, were blazing with a cold fire. She strode into the danger room, and the temperature seemed to drop several degrees. She fixed Scott with a glare that could have frozen magma. He is a child. A wounded, terrified child who we are supposed to be helping, not berating. He nearly blew a hole in the west wing. Scott shot back, finally letting go of Izuku, who collapsed back onto the floor, sobbing. And whose idea was it to put him in here in the first place? Ororo countered, her voice dangerously quiet. Whose brilliant idea was it to test an unstable Omega-level mutant by telling him to smash something? You pointed a cannon at a wall and are now shocked that it fired. Scott was silent, his jaw tight. He knew she was right. Ororo knelt beside Izuku, her presence a stark contrast to Scott's harshness. She gently touched his uninjured shoulder. Her touch was warm, and the frantic, panicked energy that had been coursing through him seemed to calm, just slightly. Breathe, Izuku, she said softly. Match my breathing. In and out. She breathed with him, her calm rhythm a lifeline in his sea of pain. The med team is on its way. You are safe. She looked at his mangled arm, at the green energy that was still faintly, destructively, crackling around the wounds. You treat your power like a sledgehammer, she said, her voice a low murmur, meant only for him. You believe you must conquer it, wrestle it into submission. But it is not your enemy. It is a part of you. It is in every cell of your being. You cannot fight it. You must learn to flow with it. She looked up at the hole in the wall, then back at him. I command the weather. I do not create the storm, Izuku. I guide it. I feel the wind and the rain, the pressure and the heat. I become one with it, and I ask it to bend to my will. It is a partnership. Harmony, not conflict. That is what you must find. She gently brushed a tear from his cheek. Your power is not a fist. It is a river. And you are trying to punch it into flowing. You must learn to swim. The words were cryptic, poetic, but they sank deep into Izuku's mind, past the pain and the failure. A river, not a fist. It was a concept so alien to everything he had ever learned about power, from All Might's smashes to Bakugo's explosions. Power was impact. Power was force. But Ororo was suggesting something else entirely. Power as harmony. The med team arrived, a flurry of professional efficiency. They stabilized his limbs, administered a powerful painkiller that made the world go fuzzy and soft at the edges, and loaded him onto a hover stretcher. The last thing he saw before they wheeled him out of the danger room was Scott Summers, standing alone amidst the wreckage, his rigid posture looking less like confidence, and more like the terrible weight of responsibility. The infirmary was becoming an unpleasantly familiar place. It was a state-of-the-art medical bay, run by Dr. Cecilia Reyes, a mutant whose power was to generate a durable biofield, which she used with surgical precision to set bones and protect healing tissue. She tutored over Izuku's injuries with a mixture of professional fascination and maternal concern. Shattered radius and ulna, Hairline fracture in the femur, 2 cracked ribs. You really did a number on yourself this time, kid, she said, her hands glowing with a soft, golden light as she worked over his arm. Your regenerative abilities are off the charts, though. You're knitting bone faster than I can set it. Most people with these injuries would be in a cast for months. You'll be walking in a week. If you don't do it again. Izuku lay in the bed, staring at the ceiling, Ororo's words echoing in his head. Harmony, not conflict. A river, not a fist. He didn't understand. How could something so violent, so explosive, be a river? It was a tidal wave, a nuclear blast. Later that evening, after the painkillers had reduced the world to a manageable, dull ache, he had another visitor. The door slid open silently, and Jean Grey entered. She carried a tray with a glass of water and a plate of cookies. She gave him a soft, sympathetic smile. Thought you might be hungry, she said, placing the tray on his bedside table. Dr. Reyes orders. Your metabolism is probably going into overdrive to heal. Thank you, Jean-san, he mumbled, trying to push himself up. Just Jean is fine, she said, helping him adjust his pillows. Her touch was gentle, and again he felt that wave of calming empathy from her. It was like a cool cloth on a fevered brow. She sat in the chair by his bed, not saying anything for a long moment, simply letting the silence be comfortable. He appreciated it. He was tired of apologies, of lectures, of being treated like a problem. Then, her eyes fell on the table next to him. His new notebook was lying there, open to a page filled with sketches of Cyclops' visor. He had been trying to diagram how the ruby quartz crystal focused and contained the raw concussive force from Scott's eyes. There were equations, energy diagrams, and notes on potential weaknesses and applications. Izuku's face flushed with embarrassment. Oh, that's nothing. Just a hobby. He reached to close it, but Jean put a hand gently on his. No, don't, she said, her green eyes scanning the page with genuine interest. This is incredible, Izuku. She wasn't humoring him. She was actually impressed. She pointed to a complex diagram. You've correctly hypothesized the adjustable aperture system and the psionic feedback loop that connects Scott to the visor. He's never explained that to anyone but the professor and me. How did you know? I just watched him, Izuku stammered, his confidence growing slightly under her praise. During training, the way he adjusts his stance before a wide-angle blast, the slight tilt of his head, it suggests he's not just aiming physically, but also mentally. He's controlling the output with his thoughts, which means the visor must be psionically responsive. And the way he braces himself, the recoil from his blast should be immense, but it's not. So the suit must be absorbing and redistributing the kinetic energy, but even that wouldn't be enough. The only logical conclusion is that the blast itself is not pure kinetic force but a portal to another dimension filled with non-Newtonian energy, meaning he's not just firing a beam, he's opening a hole and letting the pressure out, which is why, he trailed off, realizing he was rambling again, his face turning red. Sorry, Jean was staring at him, her mouth slightly agape. Don't be sorry, she said, her voice filled with a new level of awe. That's brilliant. You figured out in a week what took the professor and a team of physicists months to confirm. Izuku, do you realize what you have? He looked at her, confused. A self-destructive power? No, she said, shaking her head, her red hair catching the light. She tapped a finger on his notebook. This is your greatest asset. It's not the Omega-level power in your cells, it's the Omega-level mind that's analyzing it. Scott sees your power as a cannon. Ororo sees it as a river. They're both right, from their perspectives. But you're the one who can draw the blueprints. You can understand the mechanics of the cannon, and the hydrology of the river. She met his gaze, her own eyes shining with sincerity. You've been trying to be All Might. A symbol who solves problems with his fists. But your real gift, your true power, isn't your fist. It's your brain. Stop trying to be the hero you admire, Izuku. Start trying to be the hero only you can be. A profound silence filled the room. Jean's words resonated deeper than Ororo's, deeper even than Scott's condemnation. They didn't just address his power, they addressed him. His identity. For his entire life, His analysis had been a hobby, a quirk, a sign of his obsessive, hero-crazed personality. No one had ever called it a strength. No one had ever called it a power in itself. He looked from Jean's earnest face to the open pages of his notebook, filled with the evidence of who he truly was. A boy who didn't just see powers, but saw systems, patterns, possibilities. A river, not a fist. Harmony, not conflict. And a brain to understand how it all worked. For the first time since the cataclysm on the beach, a genuine, solid path began to form in the chaotic wilderness of his mind. It wasn't a path to becoming the next All Might. It was a path to becoming the first Deku. And for the first time, that didn't feel like a name for someone useless. It felt like a beginning. He picked up a cookie from the tray Jean had brought. It tasted like hope. The aftermath of the Danger Room incident settled over Izuku like a physical shroud. The frantic, explosive power was gone, replaced by the dull, throbbing ache of healing bones and the sharper, more persistent pain of failure. His right arm was in a sophisticated biocast that hummed with low-level energy, accelerating his already prodigious healing, but his spirit was in traction. Scott Summers's words echoed in his quieter moments, a potential natural disaster, and he couldn't deny their truth. Yet, amidst the wreckage of his confidence, the seeds planted by Ororo and Jean had begun to germinate. A river, not a fist. Your mind is your greatest asset. The concepts were revolutionary, a complete paradigm shift from the ideology of overwhelming force he had inherited from All Might. He'd spent his life admiring heroes who solved problems with a single, decisive punch. Now, he was being told that his path lay not in imitation, but in innovation. He began to observe. Not just as a fan but cataloging powers, but as a student searching for a new language of control. He sat in on every training session he was allowed to, his notebook and pen his constant companions. He was no longer just watching for the wow factor. He was looking for the subtlety, the discipline, the harmony. He watched Colossus. The gentle giant, Pyotr Rasputin, would transform his body into organic steel. Izuku had always seen it as a simple on-off switch, flesh to metal. But now, watching closely, he saw it wasn't instantaneous. For a microsecond, a wave of silver would flow over Pyotr's skin, like liquid mercury, tracing the lines of his muscles before hardening. It was a seamless, controlled process, a state of being he entered, not a brute force he activated. It was a flow. He watched Nightcrawler. Kurt's teleportation was a marvel of physics-defying acrobatics. But Izuku started to notice the quiet moments before the BMF. Kurt's eyes would unfocus slightly. His body would coil not like a spring, but like a river eddying before a waterfall. He wasn't just thinking I want to be over there. He was feeling the space, sensing the destination, and then simply yielding to the path between 2 points. It was spatial awareness elevated to an art form, an instinctual dance with reality itself. Most of all, he watched Cyclops. Scott was the avatar of control. His power was a constant, terrifying pressure behind his eyes, a universe of concussive force desperate to escape. His visor and his discipline were the only things keeping it contained. Izuku saw it now, not as simple restraint, but as a constant, dynamic act of balancing. Scott wasn't just holding back a flood. He was managing a dam, constantly adjusting the spillways, redirecting the pressure, living every second of his life in a state of perfect, precarious equilibrium. It was a level of control so absolute it was breathtaking. He filled his notebook with these new observations. He drew diagrams not of power output, but of energy flow. He wrote notes not on ultimate attacks, but on auras, on stances, on the quiet hum of contained energy he was beginning to perceive in the mansion's powerful inhabitants. He was learning a new philosophy of power, one based not on explosive release, but on constant, regulated circulation. A river, not a fist. The epiphany came late one night, in the sterile quiet of his room. He couldn't sleep. The low-level thrum of his own dormant power was a constant companion, a sleeping giant in the bed with him. He was terrified of it. He had locked it away in the mental box Professor Xavier had helped him build, but he could feel it pressing against the walls, wanting out. He sat up, his heart pounding. The memory of his bones shattering, of the raw, screaming agony, was a potent deterrent. But Jean's words echoed louder. Start trying to be the hero only you can be. He looked at his own body. He was a container, a vessel filled with an ocean of energy. His previous attempts to use it were like trying to bail out that ocean with a bucket, a single, violent scoop. The result was a catastrophic spill. The energy was too vast, too potent to be used in isolated, explosive bursts from a single point like his fist. That wasn't control. It was a localized detonation. What if he didn't try to use it at all? What if, instead of trying to scoop a bucket full out, he just opened the floodgates a tiny crack? Not from one point, but from everywhere at once. He closed his eyes, his breathing shallow. He pictured the power inside him, the raging green sun. But instead of seeing it as a weapon to be fired, he visualized it as a circulatory system, a network of light running parallel to his own veins and arteries. He imagined pulling not a percentage of its power, but a single, shimmering thread of it. He didn't try to send it to his fist. Instead, he pictured that thread of light leaving the core in his chest and flowing through his entire body, down his arms, through his torso, into his legs, all the way to the tips of his fingers and toes. A complete closed circuit. A loop. The energy wouldn't be used and expelled, it would be circulated and contained. He took a deep, shuddering breath and committed to the idea. He mentally reached for the latch on his psychic lockbox. He didn't throw the door open. He just turned the handle, ever so slightly. The effect was instantaneous. A jolt of pure, clean energy surged through him. It was not the agonizing, bone-shattering cataclysm of before. It was a warm, vibrant hum, a feeling of being plugged into the universe itself. Thin, emerald-green lines of light, like intricate circuitry, flared to life across his skin, visible even in the dim light of his room. A faint, green aura, smelling faintly of ozone and summer lightning, shimmered around his body. The low-level thrum at the base of his skull quieted, replaced by a smooth, powerful current. He felt incredible. He wasn't just strong, he felt light, alive, every cell in his body singing with perfectly controlled energy. There was no pain, no strain, no sense of his body tearing itself apart. The river was flowing, and he was swimming with the current. He pushed himself off the bed. His movements felt fluid, effortless. He took a tentative step, and the floor seemed to spring under his feet. He pushed off, just a little, and found himself leaping higher than he ever had before, his head brushing the ceiling before he landed as softly as a cat, the energy in his legs absorbing the impact completely. He looked at his hands. The green lines of light pulsed with a steady, rhythmic beat, in time with his own heart. He clenched his fist, and it felt solid, powerful, but not like a bomb waiting to go off. It felt like a perfectly calibrated tool. This was it. This was the answer. It wasn't about using a percentage of his power. It was about defining the area of the power. By spreading a minuscule amount of it across his entire body, he could handle the strain. He wasn't a cannon anymore. He was a capacitor, constantly charging and discharging within a closed system. He needed a name for it. It was a technique, a state of being. The energy covered his entire body, a suit of power. It was his own skin, but enhanced. Full cowl. The name came to him, simple and direct, and the output, it felt like almost nothing, a tiny fraction of the raging sea within him. Full cowl, 1%. He whispered into the quiet of his room, a massive, teary-eyed grin spreading across his face. He had done it. He had found a way. It wasn't a smash. It was something new. It was his. The next morning, Izuku walked with a new purpose. He found Scott in the briefing room, reviewing mission reports. The X-Men leader looked up as he entered, his expression as unreadable as ever behind the ever-present visor. Summer-san. Scott, Izuku began, his voice shaking slightly but firm. I've found something. I think I've found a way. I need to show you. In the danger room, Scott raised an eyebrow. The last time you were in the danger room, you cost the professor $250,000 in repairs and yourself a week in the infirmary. Forgive me if I'm not enthusiastic. Please, Izuku insisted, his green eyes burning with a desperate sincerity. It's different this time. No smashing. No explosions. It's control. There was something different about the boy. A new confidence, a new centeredness. Scott studied him for a long, silent moment. Against his better judgment, his curiosity was piqued. Fine, he said, pushing back his chair. One demonstration. But the instant I see your power spiking, I'm shutting it down. Understood? Understood, Izuku said with a firm nod. They stood once more on the cold, grid floor of the newly repaired danger room. This time, Ororo and Jean were present in the observation booth, their expressions a mixture of hope and trepidation. No simulations, Scott said, his arms crossed. Just you. Show me. Izuku took a deep breath, closing his eyes. He reached for the river within. He opened the mental floodgate, just that single, controlled crack. The effect was just as potent as it had been in his room. The green, bioelectric energy flared to life, tracing its beautiful, terrifying patterns across his body. A low hum filled the air. He opened his eyes. In the observation booth, Jean gasped. His energy output, it's stable. Incredibly low, but perfectly, consistently stable. It's not building toward a release. It's circulating. Scott's posture stiffened. He could see it too. The kid wasn't powering up for an attack. He was existing in a state of controlled power. Full cowl, Izuku said, testing the name out loud. He bent his knees and leaped. He shot 20 feet into the air, did a clumsy but controlled flip, and landed on the other side of the room with barely a sound. He felt fast. He felt strong. He felt whole. He looked at his hands, then back at Scott. I can hold this. There's no strain. It's not a burst. It's a constant flow. I think this is the key. Scott was silent for a full minute, just watching the boy who was now glowing with a soft, controlled light. He walked forward, his boots echoing in the large chamber. He stopped a few feet from Izuku. All right, he said, his voice stripped of its earlier antagonism, replaced by a clinical, instructor's tone. Let's see what it can do. A simple test. Agility course. Alpha 7. The danger room walls shimmered and transformed into a complex obstacle course of moving platforms, laser grids, and swinging pendulums. Objective: get from this side to the other. Without getting hit. Go. Izuku's eyes widened, but he nodded. He took a breath, feeling the power thrumming through him. He ran. He was faster than he had ever been. The world seemed to slow down just a fraction. He leaped from a platform just as it retracted, twisted in midair to avoid a sweeping laser beam, and landed on a narrow ledge. His body moved with a newfound grace and power he'd only ever dreamed of. It was clumsy, unrefined. He almost overshot a jump and had to scramble for purchase. But he was doing it. He was using his power without breaking himself. He was in control. He reached the other side, breathing heavily, the green aura flickering slightly with his exertion. He was grinning, a wide, triumphant, tear-streaked smile. He looked at Scott. For the first time since Izuku had arrived, Scott Summers offered him a nod. It was small, almost imperceptible, a tiny dip of his chin, but coming from the stoic, demanding leader of the X-Men, it felt like a medal of honor. Your form is sloppy, Scott said, his voice back to its usual critical tone, but the biting edge was gone. Your landings are uncontrolled. Your spatial awareness needs work. But the theory is sound. He turned to leave the room. Be in the gym tomorrow morning. 0600 hours. We begin actual training. Izuku stared after him, his heart soaring. It wasn't praise. It wasn't a welcome. But it was an acceptance. And for now, that was more than enough. The change in the mansion's atmosphere was palpable. Izuku was no longer the walking time bomb. He was the kid who had figured it out. His quiet confidence began to bleed into his interactions. He still spent most of his time studying, but he no longer hid in the corner. He would join Jubilee and Kitty for lunch, listening to their chatter. He would have quiet, philosophical conversations with Pyotr in the greenhouse about the nature of strength. He was slowly, tentatively, becoming part of the family. His training with Scott was brutal. Cyclops was a relentless taskmaster, pushing Izuku's full cowl to its limits. He drilled him on agility, on endurance, on tactical thinking. He forced Izuku to maintain the flow of power while solving complex mathematical equations, teaching him to separate conscious thought from instinctual control. Your power is a part of you now, Scott would bark as Izuku dodged holographic projectiles. You don't think about breathing. You shouldn't have to think about this. Storm's lessons were different. She took him out to the lakeside during the quiet hours of dawn. She taught him not about combat, but about connection. Close your eyes, Izuku, she would say, her voice as calm as the still water. Do not just feel the power inside you. Feel the world around you. Feel the warmth of the sun on your skin. That is energy. Feel the wind moving through the trees. That is energy. Feel the solid ground beneath your feet. That too is energy. Your power draws from all of it. You are not an island. You are a part of the whole. Under her guidance, he learned to subtly influence the flow, to draw a little more from the ambient heat to make his movements quicker, or from the kinetic energy of the wind to make his leaps higher. His control became more refined, more intuitive. He was learning to swim. A few weeks after his breakthrough, Professor Xavier decided it was time for another kind of lesson. A lesson in reality. The younger students are running low on certain school supplies, the professor announced one Saturday morning. And I believe a trip off campus would be beneficial for morale. Scott Ororo, I'd like you to take a group into Salem Center. Izuku, you will be joining them. Izuku's eyes lit up. A trip into a real American town. He'd spent all his time at the mansion, a beautiful but isolated bubble. The thought of seeing a normal town, of going to a normal store, was thrilling. The group that piled into a discreet civilian van was a strange collection. There was Scott, in a leather jacket and sunglasses that served the same purpose as his visor, looking deeply uncomfortable in his undercover gear. There was Ororo, effortlessly elegant in a simple dress. Jubilee was vibrating with excitement, while Kitty and Pyotr seemed to just be enjoying the prospect of a day out. And then there was Izuku, in a new hoodie, his notebook tucked safely in his backpack, buzzing with nervous energy. Salem Center was aggressively normal. It was a quaint, picturesque small town with a main street lined with brick buildings, a cinema, a diner, and a pizza parlor. People milled about, going about their Saturday errands. It was a world away from the gleaming, hero-saturated cityscape of Muzudafu. It was quiet. At first, things were fine. They split up, with Ororo taking the younger girls to a bookstore while Scott, Pyotr, and Izuku went to an office supply store. Izuku was in heaven, his eyes wide as he took in the different brands of pens, the variety of notebooks. It was so wonderfully, beautifully mundane. But then, the look started. A woman at the checkout counter gave Pyotr, who was in his human form but still stood at a towering 6.5 feet with a faint Russian accent, a suspicious, narrowed glare. A man walking past them on the street did a double take at Scott's very obviously high-tech sunglasses, muttering something under his breath. The real shift happened when they all met up for pizza. They found a table at a local parlor, the air thick with the smell of garlic and baking dough. Jubilee was laughing, telling a story and punctuating it with tiny, harmless sparks from her fingertips, a gesture as natural to her as waving her hands. A man at a nearby table, heavy-set and with a face curdled into a permanent sneer, slammed his fist on his table. Hey! Keep your freak show to yourself! Jubilee flinched, the light from her hands extinguishing instantly. Her cheerful expression vanished, replaced by a guarded, hurt look. There's no need for that kind of language, Ororo said, her voice dangerously calm. The man stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He sneered at them, his eyes filled with a venomous hatred. Oh, I think there is. We don't want your kind here. Go back to whatever lab you crawled out of, muties. The word hung in the air, ugly and sharp. Izuku felt a cold knot of anger form in his stomach. This man didn't know them. He didn't know Jubilee's kindness or Pyotr's gentle soul. He just saw something different, something he didn't understand, and his immediate reaction was hate. Another man from the same table stood up, emboldened. He walked past their table on his way to the restroom and, with deliberate malice, spat on the floor right next to Ororo's feet. A low growl rumbled in Pyotr's chest. The air in the room grew heavy and humid, a sure sign of Ororo's anger rising. Scott's hand rested on the side of his glasses, a silent, deadly warning. Izuku was frozen. His mind, steeped in the Japanese hero culture where heroes were universally beloved celebrities, couldn't process the scene. These people were heroes. They saved lives, and they were being treated like filth. He felt a surge of righteous fury, the green energy of full call flaring instinctively under his skin. He wanted to stand up. He wanted to shout. He wanted to defend his new friends. Before he could move, Scott's hand shot out and gripped his arm, a silent, iron-strong command to stay put. Scott's jaw was tight, a muscle twitching in his cheek, but his face was a mask of cold control. "We're leaving," he said, his voice low and even. He threw some money on the table, more than enough to cover the pizzas they had ordered but hadn't touched. They walked out of the parlor in silence, the hatred of the men inside following them like a physical force. Out on the street, Scott finally let go of Izuku's arm. The cool air did little to dispel the hot, suffocating anger and shame Izuku felt. He looked at Scott, his expression a whirlwind of confusion and outrage. "Why didn't we do anything? They insulted you. They disrespected Ororo. We could have what?" Scott interrupted, his voice laced with a weary bitterness that Izuku had never heard before. "Started a fight? Proved them right? Given them exactly what they wanted? A reason to call the police? A reason to tell the news that a group of violent mutants terrorized a pizza parlor?" He stopped and turned to face Izuku, the full, crushing weight of his experience evident in his posture. "Welcome to the world we're fighting for, kid," he said, his voice raw. "It's filled with people we're sworn to protect, even when they hate our guts. Even when they spit at our feet. We don't get to fight back. We don't get to lose our cool. We have to be better. We have to absorb the hate and still do the right thing." He looked at the faces of his team. At Jubilee, who was trying very hard not to cry. At Pyotr, whose fists were still clenched at his sides. At Ororo, whose regal composure had returned, but whose eyes held a deep, ancient sadness. "This," Scott said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "is the real danger room. And it's a test you never, ever get to pass. You just have to survive it." Izuku stood on the quaint, quiet street of Salem Center, the world-shattering power of a god humming under his skin, and for the first time, he understood that the greatest battles he would face wouldn't be against supervillains or giant robots. They would be fought in the quiet, ugly moments in a pizza parlor, against an enemy he could never smash. An enemy called hatred. And he realized, with a chilling certainty, that all the power in the universe might not be enough to win.